resurrection and standing in his presence for eternity, and that's what the Mashiach came to talk about. So here, there's two letters which are men, the Vav and the Resh. The Vav is like this, behold the man slain, the man subject to death. Resurrecting, Kuf means after this, or the back of the head, or it means to ascend or to descend, and Resh is the exalted man. So if you think about it, Vav is like the caterpillar type. Ben Yosef, the son of Joseph. And those who study the scriptures in this esoteric way say there's an inference of two messiahs, and they don't figure it out. They call him Ben Yosef and Ben David, the suffering servant and the exalted king.
I don't think you have to study Kabbalah to get that.
Well, I think that's just an esoteric writing.
Yeah, I think it's a clear open thing in the Tanakh.
It's not so clear, you got to look.
Well, it's not so clear, yeah, because it doesn't shout at you, but Pinchas was a priest of a war and had a covenant forever. We just finished studying that.
I'll show you something about Pinchas. Remind me if I
Okay.
don't go back there. It's very interesting.
Okay.
The covenant of peace, we'll address that.
But
The
that to
point
me
is-
is like the two messiahs almost.
Well, it looks like two messiahs, but what I'm suggesting is that the entire alphabet is describing the one Echad plan, which incorporates two manifestations as men. One, the caterpillar type of Ben Yosef, who is put to death, Zion, and entombed Chet, stone rolled in front of him, Tet, but yet by his hand, Yod, I, Aleph, have done this, these 10 letters. But now regarding you, all of them, all of these instructions and all of these matters, is in order to noon bring forth the righteousness, so that as you do what he said, the scales will be tipped, and he'll explain the way the whole thing, in order to resurrect the kingdom, in order to resurrect us at the end of days, in order to sprout life back on the earth after it's been destroyed by everybody else monkeying around with things who don't keep his words. And that after this, Kuf also looks like a sickle of harvest. After this, it's the back of the head, it means later on. It's the monkey's arm, which means a long reach into the future, and say, where's the promise of his coming? We've heard about this for centuries. Yeah, right. That's what Kuf means. Yaakov is spelled with a Q, Kuf, our letter Q, which has to do with a foot. When you walk, what follows you is your footprint that's left behind. So that's where they get the word heel. So Yaakov, when he grabbed at the heel of Esau, it was kicking him in the head, whether he was blunting the force or whether he was grabbing head to try to usurp his position. You got all these pictures in there. It's the letter Kuf, which means after this, or that which follows. That which follows is Resh Shin Tav. As a word, Resh Shin Tav literally means snare, trap, net, or to gather up your stuff, bundle it all up, and take it home with you. Aleph means I will as a prefix. Bet Gimel Dalet is bagged, which is clothing. But it's baggy camouflage clothing where you can't see the true shape. Simula, Samach Mem Lamed, is like great spandex, where it's tight-fitting clothing where you can see the shape. You look like very similar to what you really look like if it's tight-fitting. But if it's baggy clothing, it hides it. So, Aleph, I will, baguette, clothe myself in a camouflage disguise that, hey, looks like a Vav man who will be put to death. But Zion as a weapon also means the distinguished one of its type. So if this is the original alphabet, going all the way back to the beginning, then neither Christian nor Jewish, he's saying he will put himself into material form, give himself a foot to go to the earth, a place to walk in his garden estate. Hey, revealed as the man who would be slain. After this, he's going to come back in preeminent glory as Shin El Shaddai, the teeth and fire destroying his enemies, Kav fulfilling his plan from the very beginning. Who is that? Well, that looks like this Christian story, but it's not the story of Jesus Christ, because the story of Jesus Christ says, at least by the testimony of his followers, he did away with the Sabbath day. He did away with the festivals, nailed the Torah to the cross. We don't have to keep any instructions. We're under the law of grace. What I'm saying is, I believe that this is Yeshua, which is the salvation of Yahweh, who is the Mashiach, which is the word Mashiach. Mush is where we get the word something feels mushy. It's feelable, touchable. That, you look it up, Mem Shin, Mem Vav Shin, that's what that means, the feel. Shich, Shin Yod Het means the communicator, the speaker. So here is communication or the speaker, well, that's the word. The word made touchable is Mashiach, and the word Mashiach also means to be anointed or plastered or the one that's authorized. So here the word Mashiach, it doesn't mean just simply the Christ figure or the avatar, the special guy. It means the tangible, touchable communication. Well, that's the Word made flesh. But that's in the Hebrew language itself. So if anybody says, there's no way Yahweh would do that, we're using letters of Yahweh's own description, I myself, the Aleph to the Tav, describing himself, and within this embedded is these concepts, which looks like the Christian gospel, but where the Christian gospel, I think, fails, is that they say, he did away with everything. And then you go back to read what Yahweh said. There's these other verses I was going to get to today, where he says, when you return to me. You will come back to these words I gave to Moshe. And if anybody leads you astray, that's a trick, it's not for me. You're supposed to come back and obey these words. The point is, where and who is Israel? Where is Israel? Well, Batya Wooten wrote a book called Who is Israel? Have any of you seen it? She does a very good job. She basically says, whether or not you can trace your genetic descendant through all these other people, well, there might be something to that. But it almost doesn't matter. Because Yahweh, when he let his people out of Egypt, he says, I'm Yahweh your Elohim, who took you out of the house of Egypt, out of the slavery, oppression, to bring you into my own, pet. I'm your king. I'm the one that's going to take care of you. I'm your daddy now. And nobody else can touch you. But guess what? Anybody in the world is allowed to come into this group of people, this enclave of my own Ami. And he says, I'm going to be your Elohim, and you're going to be my people. My people Israel. Anybody can join up if they want to. Whether or not we can trace our genetics back to Israel doesn't matter, at least in that regard. Now, where it might matter is Yahweh says, I'm going to scatter Israel across the face of the earth. I'm going to drive them out because they forsake my ways, but I know where every single one of them is. And furthermore, he says of Abraham, your descendants will be like the stars of the sky, like the sand of the sea, and all the world will bless themselves in you. Now, what does that mean? Well, it might be that you could find traces of Abrahamic lineage genetically in everybody or in every country. Whatever that means, I'm not sure. I don't need to know. All I know is, can I choose to turn back to this covenant? So here, in the class I gave last year, I tried to make this point. Do the Christian, as they, when I say the Christians, I'm not trying to bash them. I'm not trying to knock anybody. Just for the record, the disciples of Yeshua were Jewish. Yeshua was the king of the Jews. He was Jewish. The first believers in Yeshua were Jewish, of Israel. His followers were Jewish. His followers, his apostles, did not go make Christian disciples. They later were called Christians. But the word Christ is a Greek word which is basically an avatar, a Christ figure. And there were many Kyrios, Christos, Messias. There were many of them. They were just some big shot, kind of special guy, almost like a prophet. It wasn't the particular Christ. It became known as that. But that, at that time, also started changing and being counter to the Jewish Torah. Then at the time of Constantine, in 321, 325, Council of Nicaea, he gathered up pagan religions and Christ figures and various Kyrios, amalgamated them into what became Christianity and made it the state religion. But part of that, he says, now he's the first Christian emperor. They redefined Christianity. The Orthodox Church tried to keep on a certain track. The Roman Catholic Church splintered off. The Greek Orthodox, Romanian Orthodox, Russian Orthodox consider the Catholics to be Protestant, like punk teenagers who rebel against the Father's house. But the Catholics then maintained this jurisdiction through, the lineage of Peter and that whole thing, and the Pope. And then when Martin Luther and the Protestant Reformation says, they said, hey, you're not going along with us. You're like a bunch of punk teenagers too, rebels. However, they say, but you guys haven't fallen too far away, because every time you regard Sunday as the holy day instead of Shabbat, you're bowing the knee to the Pope. So even though the Protestants who think they're on track completely aren't, because they haven't gone back to Yod-Heh-Vav-Heh. So what I'm saying is, I'm not bashing the Christians, I'm trying to say, how do we determine the truth? How do we go back to the true Word? The word gospel, it comes from the Hebrew word basara, which has to do with the flesh, with the meat. It's the fruit with the seed within itself. That's the same word as good news. What is the good news? Now, a lot of people think that the good news is there is no law, we don't have to do a darn thing. Abraham is the model of our faith. He didn't have to do a darn thing. All he did was believe, and it was credited to him for righteousness. It said right back there in Genesis. Hebrews validates it. Is Hebrew accurate? Ask Monty Judah, Johnson Tibbles. Monty Judah found a couple things where Hebrews was wrong. And yet, can't be wrong. It's the Bible. It's infallible. Can't be wrong. Monty Judah must be nuts. So when Monty Judah said there was a problem with the book of Hebrews in a couple places, half of Monty Judah's adherents broke away and said, this guy's a lunatic. And he went down the tubes to a certain degree. I happened to read this one article Monty Judah did in Lion and Lamb Ministries. It's like, I'm going to look for myself. So I looked in the book of Hebrews. And here's one of the problems. In the Mishkan, I've been studying this for quite a while. In the Kadosh place, otherwise known as the holy place, menorah, table, showbread, altar of incense. In the Kadosh Kodashim, Holy of Holies, most holy place, Ark of the Covenant, Ark of the Testimony. That's it. And in the Ark of the Testimony, there was the tables of stone, Aaron's rod that budded, and a little bit of the manna. But that's all that was in there. In the book of Hebrews, it says out in the holy place, in the Kadosh place, was menorah and table of showbread. And that in the Kadosh Kodashim was the altar of incense and the Ark of the Covenant. It's not true. It's wrong. How do you explain that? The Bible's infallible. Well, then there's this little note that says, oh, what he meant was, the writer of Hebrews, what he meant was, that when the high priest would go in there once a year on Yom Kippur, he took with him the incense. And when he took in the incense with him, he might have set it down and maybe sprinkled blood or something. The incense was in there. It's like, that's a lame excuse for a problem. The problem is, the book of Hebrews said something which isn't true. There's actually a couple other issues in there that Monty Judah found. So Monty Judah gets crucified for telling the truth.
Right.
What's up with that?
They always kill the prophets.
Well, if I was told, well, if you're going to question Hebrews, you might as well question Thessalonians.